Sunak want to delay. He used to be the Chancellor, remember. He's going to want to delve right into these books. And as Hunt has put it, these are eye-wateringly difficult decisions that need to be made. Although former BOE and OBR official Charlie Bean has said that he expects the fiscal black hole may have shrunk from £40 billion before. The need to do that now, given that we seem to have someone who is desperate to reassure us that they've got their hand on the tiller, that they can calm the markets. That is the ultimate message that Jeremy Hunt is making here, that they will balance the books in the medium term. You have to wonder, will the BOE be reassured by this message from Jeremy Hunt?
I've just been to Buckingham Palace and accepted His Majesty the King's invitation to form a government in his name. It is only right to explain why I'm standing here as your new Prime Minister. Right now, our country is facing a profound economic crisis. The aftermath of COVID still lingers. Putin's war in Ukraine has destabilized energy markets and supply chains the world over. I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made. Not born of ill will or to protect people and businesses with schemes like furlough. There are always limits, more so now than ever. But I promise you this, I will bring that same compassion to the challenges we face today. The government I lead will not leave the next generation, your children and grandchildren, with a debt to settle that we were too weak to pay ourselves. I will unite our country, not with words, but with action. I will work day in and day out to deliver for you. This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will always be grateful to Boris Johnson for his incredible achievements as Prime Minister, and I treasure his warmth and generosity of spirit. And I know he would agree that the mandate my party earned in 2019 is not the sole property of any one. It is a mandate that belongs to and unites all of us. And the heart of that mandate is our manifesto. I will deliver on its promise, a stronger NHS, to reach out and build a government that represents the very best traditions of my party. Together, we can achieve incredible things. We will create a future worthy of the sacrifices so many have made, and fill tomorrow and every day thereafter.
Represented by the original Truss proposals. But I think there are two lessons that policymakers around the world need to heed. The first is that things can change extraordinarily fast if you lose credibility. Just as it takes a long time to grow a forest, but you can burn it down very quickly, something similar is true with respect to credibility and confidence. And I think at a time of rising government debts and rising interest rates, that's a lesson to be careful that policymakers in many different countries need to take account of. I would say the second, more specific lesson just goes to the potential instability in government debt markets. And that's got both a macroeconomic aspect, that if your deficit projection starts to get out of control and your real interest rates start to rise rapidly, you can get into a kind of doom loop. And it also has to do with liquidity in the markets and the possibility that you'll get a situation where there'll be selling, but there won't be buying, which will beget a kind of liquidation cycle. And I think given the magnitude of the increases in interest rates that you're seeing in other parts of the world, that's something that policymakers are going to have to be very careful of. I thought Secretary Yellen was right to warn about issues around illiquidity in the U.S. Treasury markets. I think we're going to need to be watching our own fiscal projections in the United States very carefully, because I think they're going to look different with current market interest rates. If you factor in the recession that's likely to come, that's going to have some significant effects. If you factor in all the different steps that are being taken, whether it's the student loan debt relief or the emergency funding that's going to take place because of the hurricane in Florida, or the increases in national security expenditures that I think are almost inevitable given what's happening in other parts of the world, I suspect that the fiscal issue is going to need sooner or later to be back on the table in the United States. So I think that we can be amused, those of us who don't live there, by some of the things that are happening in Britain. But if we think of it as an experience that's entirely outside of any kinds of concerns that other countries could have, that would be a real mistake.
Well, and Larry, as you say, we have to perhaps pay much more attention to the fiscal side, be a bit more responsible. That's at the same time that many people, and you included, are warning that we may well be heading to a recession here. In the past several years, it's thought that if there's a recession, we can just write some fiscal checks for it. If we don't have that ability, the way it turns out Liz Truss did not have over in the United Kingdom, what does that mean about our ability to pull out of it? What is the prospect that when we've had so many years of feast, we may be headed for some famine on higher interest rates, lower growth, and lower productivity increase?
Look, David, there's always a tendency at the beginning or in the early stages of very problematic periods to assume that everything is going to be resolved much more quickly than actually proves to be the case. Think about COVID. I was early on your program and was very worried about COVID, but I certainly didn't envision that it would be something that would still be on people's minds going into the winter of 2023. And I think it's a mistake to think that all of our economic challenges are going to be met quickly, particularly if we heed what I think would be the dangerous advice that are coming from the erstwhile members of Team Transitory, that the Fed can back off already and not carry through on the increases that the market is now expecting. I think for that to happen would be to almost guarantee a protracted period of stagflation, as we lacked both price stability and confidence. I think we need to remember that apart from anything we do with discretionary policy, we have a whole set of natural stabilizers that kick in our economy. As the economy goes down, tax collections go down. As unemployment crosses certain thresholds, there are increases in unemployment insurance payments. But unfortunately, I think we fired the fiscal cannon so strongly that there's going to be limited room for discretionary fiscal policy if we have another recession.
Finally, Larry, one of the other events of the week was the release, further release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve by President Biden, who swears this is not a political issue. But could you give us the economic potential effects of those sorts of releases?
David, I think the initial SPRO release was a powerful thing that over the last months has done a lot to contain oil prices, and I think the Biden administration was exactly right to do it strongly, do it for a long time, do it in coordination with others. I think it's much less clear how much scope there is for that policy to work further going forward. In part, that's because of many of the constraints are on the refining side. In part, that's because it's a little bit like QE for the Fed. Whatever you put out there, you're going to have to get back in at some point, and that's going to have the opposite impact on oil prices. So I think you got to be careful about that instrument from here. And I think that we've all got to be very apprehensive about the degree of confrontation that now exists between the United States and what might be called the Russian-Saudi axis. This is going to be a very complex time, and I hope that we get through it while avoiding oil price spikes. My guess is that that's going to happen, but I think that's a major downside wild card from here, both with respect to inflation and with respect to recession.
I'd like to pay tribute to Liz Truss for her dedicated public service to the country. She has led with dignity and grace through a time of great change and under exceptionally difficult circumstances, both at home and abroad. I am humbled and honoured to have the support of my parliamentary colleagues and to be elected as leader of the Conservative and Unionist Party. It is the greatest privilege of my life to be able to serve the party I love and give back to the country I owe so much to. The United Kingdom is a great country, but there is no doubt we face a profound...
We turn now to Lizzie Burden. She is Bloomberg EMEA government and economics correspondent outside of number 10 Downing Street. So Lizzie, thank you so much for being back with us. Okay, he's humbled and honored. I guess my first question is, what does he do with it now he has it? He still has a lot of challenges, particularly on the economic front.
Yeah, a very forbidding in tray, both in terms of the economy, but also in terms of uniting his party. Really, to reassure markets, we want him to confirm when the medium-term fiscal plan is going to happen. It's expected on October the 31st, but we've heard from his spokesman already that it's not yet been confirmed. The markets also want to know whether he's going to keep Jeremy Hunt as Chancellor. But of course, it's an even more difficult economic task because of what T.S. Lombard calls the more on risk premium left by Liz Truss. He's going to have to find deeper spending cuts, bigger tax rises, and that's going to rock the boat potentially with the right wing of his party, because in order to get here, to be anointed as Prime Minister, he's had to bring together a very broad coalition of Tory MPs, and if he annoys the right wing either on Brexit or tax rises, that coalition could be lost.
Lizzie, as you say, a very full inbox, but take a step back if you would. We've had an historic period in the United Kingdom, the shortest prime ministership ever in history of the country. Now we have the youngest prime minister in 200 years, but more important, the first non-white prime minister ever. What is the potential significance of that?
It's a huge moment in British politics, this. He's a practicing Hindu, and of course it's Diwali, so it's got a magic to it. It may have practical consequences for trade in terms of a UK-India trade deal. The Indians, of course, are notoriously difficult to negotiate with. And even though Rishi Sunak was anointed by his MPs, it wasn't put to a vote of the party membership or even the broader electorate. It does speak to the former Prime Minister David Cameron's efforts to diversify his party. Labour, of course, hasn't even had a female Prime Minister or a non-white leader. But interestingly, in polling of words associated with Rishi Sunak, more than the colour of his skin, more than his age, what's associated with him is the word rich. And that works against him, it seems, in the UK, whereas I'm thinking of the US context. It seemed to be what propelled Donald Trump into the White House, the idea that his personal wealth meant that he could be trusted.
美国永久绿卡7天就能获批，全家30万就能办。美国移民不用等，加紧递交7天获批，无需排期，直接登录，超快速拿美国绿卡。美国1B1绿卡无年龄、语言、学历限制，无雇主工作劳工证限制，一人申请，全家同享身份，各行各业人士均能申请获批。点击视频下方链接立即咨询，我们来为您进行免费评估，帮您进行专业移民指导，定制专属于您的申请方案。
For just $67, you can make as many videos as you want, and you never need to pick up a camera or use any fancy editing software. With Doodly, you drag, you drop, you tweak some settings, and boom, video done. It'll take you just a few minutes. So, let's hear from the Doodly creator, Brad, to see why Doodly is so easy to use and why you should grab this offer right now.
Hi, I'm Brad Callen, and in this video, I'm going to show you how anyone can quickly and easily create doodle videos, just like the one you're watching right now, using Doodly. Alright, here I am inside the Doodly software, which is available for Mac and PC. You'll notice that you can choose the style of your video, selecting from whiteboard, blackboard, greenboard, glassboard, and for more advanced users, you can even use a green screen background, giving you lots of control over the video style. In this example, let's create a nice looking whiteboard doodle video. You'll notice that Doodly makes it super easy to create your own doodle videos with done-for-you scenes, hundreds of characters, a huge selection of props and images, royalty-free music, and even text. And for the ultimate in customization, you can even upload your own images, fonts, props, and music. Now to create a doodle video, it's really simple. First, I'll add a headline to get people's attention, then center it before adding a character. I like this one. And while I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and add a prop too. I'll resize everything and voila, we have Steve reading a book on his chair. Not only is creating a doodle video that simple, but we also have a bunch of really cool settings available too. Doodly allows you to customize your video with real hands, cartoon hands, or none at all, seeing transitions with even camera panning. As you can see, doodle videos do an incredible job of educating, entertaining, and selling, making them one of the best investments you can make in your business. And that's especially true right now. The going rate for professional doodle video creation is anywhere from $1,000 to $3,000 to have someone make a video similar to the one that I just showed you. But with Doodly, anyone can create a doodle video regardless of tech skills and experience. If you were to visit the doodly.com homepage right now, you'd see the regular price for Doodly is an ongoing monthly payment, which adds up to $468 per year. But since you've landed on this promotion page, you can get your copy of Doodly right now for a one-time $67 payment. No monthly fees forever. And you'll even have access to all the free feature updates we offer our Doodly users, which is typically once every week. So to lock in this one-time $67 payment with zero monthly fees forever, go ahead and click or tap on the button next to this video to claim your copy of Doodly today. And we look forward to welcoming you to the Doodly family.
How much of a surprise is it that Johnson pulled out, and what does this mean for the premiership now?
Well, it's a surprise to an extent in that the longer this circus was going on for, and remember that Johnson came back from holiday to quote, because he said he was up for it. Come on, guys, we can do this. But the longer he was waiting to actually declare his hand, then the more likely it was that there were problems in actually getting his candidacy forward. So, we're now here. It's Sunday, it's Monday, and it doesn't look great, really, for Johnson. He tried, he failed, and it's not a huge surprise in that respect because he doesn't have the support of the Tory lawmakers that he maybe thought he did have. And getting support then from the Tory members in the second stage of the ballot, that would also be a problem.
So does this mean a pretty smooth run going forward for Sunak then?
Well, I think it's kind of his to lose, you could say. He maybe have 1 foot in Downing Street possibly, but you do have to recall that there is another person in this race, and that's Penny Mordaunt, and she does seem to have an element of the kind of popular vote behind her. And there is a thought that if the Tories have to go to the nation in a couple of years' time for a general election, then maybe Mordaunt, rather than Sunak, is the person to carry that national vote. So we will see. It all depends if Mordaunt can get more than 100 votes of Tory MPs between now and Monday in the UK. If she does, then the next stage is taking the straight runoff between Mordaunt and Sunak to the Conservative Party, which is 170,000 people of an average age of more than 60, should we say, who are going to vote on the next Prime Minister of the UK.
上淘寶竟然買到買唔到嘅嘢？
嗱，我已經諗好晒㗎啦。呢度首先有張大 sofa 啦，跟住呢度我有個50寸嘅大電視，然之後咧隔離有個櫃。
首席裝修已經使咗幾十萬啦。
買中買定細碼咧？
唔使咁煩惱喎，買到翻嚟唔啱身，用淘寶雙11全新免費上門退貨就得啦。淘寶高品質多功能家具仲幫你製造更多嘅空間。上門前有埋除蟲去甲醛服務添，用埋淘寶同 Alipay HK 全新中銀信用卡分期服務，付款更靈活，購物更輕鬆。雙11淘寶更多優惠等緊你。
Lizzie awaiting the next Prime Minister, and it looks like we've got an answer.
Yes, Rishi Sunak is going to be the 4th Prime Minister in 3 years in the UK. We've just had a statement from Penny Mordaunt. She says, we have now chosen our next Prime Minister. This decision is a historic one. It shows once again the diversity and talent of our party. Rishi has my full support. This race had dragged on to the very last moment. It is literally the last moment. And with it seconds to go, she has tweeted. But it seemed, John, that she just did not have the backing of the parliamentary party. Rishi Sunak had got the majority of MPs, and it was looking like Penny Mordaunt was going to face exactly the same problems that Liz Truss faced in not being able to get her agenda through Parliament. And at the very last moment, it was clear that she could no longer profess to be the unity candidate in this race.
Central bank, you may be inclined actually to go a little bit further than you need to. You might need clear evidence of disinflation, that you're in recession, which probably means, I think, Europe, we're getting there quite soon. US probably needs to run into next year.
Callum, Berenberg has just a fabulous team with Mickey Levy in America and Holger Schmieding with his brilliant continental view. Let me take you in the United Kingdom. Is the surprise forward not from the Fed, but a blink from the ECB that has a war going on?
The ECB doesn't have the same inflation problem to deal with that the US has. The US has a strong demand underpinning. The prices are rising and they're broad-based. In Europe, continental Europe, it's mainly this energy supply issue. To the extent that Europe is in recession now, we're seeing evidence of weaker demand. Really, the ECB just needs to keep raising interest rates until inflation peaks. Once that happens and they start to see those base effects roll over, you can start to take out some of the fear, you can hold rates. So I think we're probably quite close. I don't think we get close to 3% in the Eurozone. That would be more than enough, whereas the Fed probably needs to go substantially above that.
We're all focused on politics here, and certainly the zeitgeist yesterday was the separation of economics and politics in your United Kingdom. I don't buy it for a minute. How does Governor Bailey respond to a nation staggering to 2 p.m. Monday afternoon?
Well, at the moment, there's nothing for the Bank of England to do. We had the announcement earlier this week that active QT would begin towards the end of this year. The next Bank of England meeting to focus on is the 3rd of November. By that time, the Bank of England will know who the Prime Minister is and what kind of fiscal policies the UK will be pursuing over the medium term. The problem the Bank of England has got, after what we've seen, all of the noise, the bond market reaction, it probably needs to meet market expectations in the next meeting. 100 basis points is probably what we get, which will be a doubling of the rate hike in September. But I think after that, maybe 50 more basis points in December, and then the Bank of England's probably going to be done. By early next year, it's going to be so obvious that the UK is in a recession and it's disinflationary, and that you won't need to go any further.
So the Berenberg call on sterling right now as we near a 110 handle once again. Where are we on sterling with that scenario?
That scenario, we're probably moving sideways on sterling, but it's going to be volatile around the politics. You might see a bit of a relief rally if, say, Rishi Sunak, he's the market favorite, wins and becomes prime minister. But the world is really suffering from a strong dollar, and understandably so. We have a major war in Europe. West is in recession. You want deep liquid US markets, so you hold dollar assets. It's hard to see until the market turns more risk on, that dollar strength starts to come out. And so we're all going to be weak against the dollar for a while. That probably is a story for next year before we start to see this position reverse.
On a Friday, Callan Pickering, thank you so much with Berenberg.
Pleasure. Thank you
for reading over the weekend. I look at this, Lisa, and as I mentioned earlier, it started with John Byrne Murdoch in the FT on really questioning, as is Tim Colpin at Bloomberg, how you measure GDP in China. And he cites a University of Chicago paper that it could be half as much growth as we're actually seeing. So I've got a scenario out to think about over the weekend of they finally wake up to the anti-science of COVID, and pushing against that is all the challenges of a Pacific Rim slowdown. Which way do you go? I have no idea.
And that feeds into the idea that we were just hearing there from Callan Pickering, which is that dollar strength will persist. And this is the opposite of what we heard from Sebastian Gailey and Mark Chandler, because the rest of the world is flat on its back. And who does that hurt more? The Chinese slowdown? That hurts more Europe. That hurts more Germany. So then where does that strength come from that forces the dollar into a weaker position anytime soon that eases some of the inflationary imports of the European region and beyond?
Well, it's very emotional here. For those of you on radio, there has been imagery over the last number of hours and indeed days as well. And I think Lizzie Burden, of course, reporting from 10 Downing Street yesterday, captured this image. For those of you on radio, it's Lawrence the Cat at the podium outside 10 Downing Street, getting it done. And some humor here. You mentioned this yesterday, Lisa. The gallows humor is tangible. And of course, we missed the walk of the cat back to the door, but
someone also pointed out they put an Airbnb sign above 10 Downing Street. That was another meme that was going around. There have been a lot of them where they try to understand exactly how quickly this story
we will
moved.
try to keep the reporting more than distant from Lawrence the Cat. We can do that at Bloomberg.com UK. A terrific summary of all going on in London. This is Bloomberg.
내가 사랑하는 것들. 씻고 침대에 누웠을 때.
비행기에서 보는 바깥 풍경.
산책길의 가을바람.
빗소리.
좋은 날씨. 팬들 만날 때. 또 낯선 구석진 길. 역시 음악.
무대에서 듣는 함성 소리.
또 지금? 진짜 예쁘잖아요. 이렇게 예쁜 쇼파도와 함께 촬영해서 너무 행복해요.
we're going to find that this is going to be an even tougher environment than people think.
The liquidity in the market remains good.
Markets are starting to price in the idea that whatever U-turn is going to happen, nobody is guaranteed that there will be a new turn around the corner a week from now.
The reality is that hard activity data are still pretty strong.
What we're saying about 2023 is we think the first half is going to be really sloppy. That's when we think numbers come down. That's when we think we're going to be dealing with a recession.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz.
When does something break? Welcome back. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio and Bloomberg Television. Tom Keene, Jonathan Ferro, and Lisa Abramowitz. John is off running for Prime Minister in London. Right now, we are here with a market that is moving so quickly, Tom, that it really is hard to keep track of. Yields higher, dollar stronger, the rest of the world flat on its back.
And you've said the smartest quote into the weekend reading, which is this fear of the break, because what hasn't happened is we haven't broken. Now, these reaction functions, we're going to talk about this with Alicia Levine, but I'm sorry, Lisa, there's enough movable parts on a Friday where you have to lean in to try to get to the Asia Monday morning. Yen 152 rounded up is all you need to know.
I'm glad that you pointed to the yen. When does something break really paints a picture for Japan right now.
Never see
Earlier
it
this morning, people were saying, when do they come in? When do they intervene? They've intervened before. They're not intervening. 150 was the level. We're at 151. We're above that, and it's still not really coming.
I turned away to talk to Alicia Levine about the scam known as the SAT exams, and 10-year real yield moved to a 1.80 just while I looked away.
But that's my point. This is moving quickly, even after all of the increase that we have seen in yield, even after all the reset, even after markets price in a 5% Fed funds rate for the first half of next year. How much more can we possibly do?
I think it's a movable, we got the British distraction here right now, but away from that, and you and I have been remiss on this, the data on the Bloomberg screen has really been the story of the week. Can I just mention that the Bloomberg Financial Conditions Index has gone against Chairman Powell and has moved from significantly restrictive up to a gross accommodation, and again, 1.80 10-year real yield. That changes the discussion for global Wall Street.
Well, and this goes to the point that we've been hearing about from Mike Wilson over at Morgan Stanley. He said that expect a bear market rally because expectations are so low, earnings will come in and they'll be better than expected because that's what they do. They guide people lower and then they beat those very low bars, and that's what we have seen with some companies. It hasn't been enough, and that to me is a pretty big takeaway. With American Express, one of the bellwether types of companies, coming in short as well as the shipping sector.
Yeah, I'm going to mention it. I'm much more interested in Verizon, which has been a challenge for over 10 years, and they're talking about cost cutting of some form. I guess we're going to see a lot more of that into the end of the year.
We are seeing weakness, and we're seeing the weekness deepen as we see yields continue to
There's
climb.
the Bramble gloom.
Well, come on, let's take a look at what's going on. We're down 0.6% on the S&P, and it has been heading lower throughout the morning. At one point, it was really trying to stay flat. You are seeing the euro continue to weaken. This is a dollar strength story, and that, to me, I think is pretty pervasive across the world with the pound, with the euro, with the yen, 97.47, and 10-year yields. I mean, honestly, to see just on the cusp of 4.3%. Could we see 4.5% by the next couple of weeks?
I'm looking at the real yield and not the nominal story, and it's just a completely changed story. How do you write your year-end essay right now? I have no idea.
What do we do? What do we do? What do we
What do we
do?
do?
Go to
What do we
cash.
do?
Go to cash. Triple
I think
leverage all
that's
cash.
the title of Alicia Levine's.
Well, Alicia Levine actually joins us here without the Star Destroyer behind her. Alicia Levine, head of equities and capital market advisory at BNY Mellon Wealth Management. What is your view, Alicia, and how you view this move upwards in yield? Are we watching something break in slow motion?
So I don't think we're watching anything break, but we shouldn't be surprised at this because that last CPI print really said it all. Core inflation is now higher today than it was in 1982. Forget the top line, it's the core. And that's ultimately what central banks are looking at and what the Fed is looking at. And that's our problem. What's amazing to me is that ratchet up in yields this week, the equity market kind of shrugged it off. You would have thought there would have been a more dramatic reaction there. So I think we get something in the next few days to reflect what's happened with yields and with rates ratcheting up higher.
you are hugely adept at the mathematics of the moment. I want you to correlate the bond dynamics we're all talking about over to how you reset for equities into next year. Can you link the two beasts together, or are they non-correlated?
So I think you have to link the two together, because in this year, equities were really the caboose and the bond market was driving the train here,
Right.
which I get teased about,
No, but-
blaming the bond market. But it is true, because your multiples get compressed when yields and rates move higher. What the market is doing is pricing in an over 5% Fed funds rate. You're going to feel it on the equity side. You can't avoid that. It's all one system.
Okay.
You don't have assets that just trade on their own. It's against the risk-free rate.
But in a log Euclidean space, or even if you go to some fancy XYZ space as well, is it non-linear from here in the dynamics of the bond market pushing stocks around?
So that's a really interesting question. You're asking, has the work been done? Right? You're asking, have we had enough multiple compression? And I think the answer is the direction is still in a volatile way, but I do think a lot of the multiple compression has already been taken care of, because if you think we're headed into recession the first half of the year, you're going to wind up with lower yields eventually. And that, in a weird way, is going to support the market. Also, the earnings season is coming in, Lisa, as you pointed out, better than expected, in part because of inflation, in part because we had the financials report, and so they're doing well on net interest margin. And, the high-end consumer is spending. Think about Nordstrom's. Think about LVMH. And travel. So people are out there spending. It's not a total collapse yet. So you could have some stabilization as you have two-year yields move higher.
So what happens first? The Fed blinking, or seeing yields kind of get out of control and cause some sort of torpedo effect in the multiple valuations?
So I don't think the Fed blinks. Okay, so the Fed will blink if there's an event. And right now, the UK walked back from their event, which walked back the event on the global bond market. And they seem very intent on getting higher here. And they've really trapped themselves, right? They've trapped themselves because they keep on talking about CPI, which, as you know, is backward looking, because they want to signal to the average household that the Fed is on the inflation job. Backward looking. We still haven't seen the effects of the rate hiking cycle for another 6 months. So, you have signs, housing's rolling over, you have signs of a slowdown, but the Fed's out there hiking with old data.
Meanwhile, taking a look at what we're expecting from earnings, we get some of the big tech names next week. We have seen Snap. That was concerning, and it's been very concerning this morning for owners of Meta, which already has tanked. Facebook has lost a significant portion of its value. How much more do the tech bubbles have to burst at a time where they've already been devalued dramatically?
So high growth names, when they stop growing high growthly, get not only an earnings downgrade, but you get the multiple compression as well. So to the extent that you have stocks that are still trading at 40 times next year's, the tech names are still too high. Ultimately, those names have not been driven down dramatically.
I got to slip this in. If there's a factor adjustment into 2023, and I'm really big on the zombies that are going to be taken out in this new rate regime, what do the non-zombies do, and which factors matter next year for the profitable non-zombies?
So there will be a wave of M&A coming from the non-zombies, and cheap, right? You're going to have really fire sale of companies here for IP as well. You could have M&A just for IP in some of these sectors. But, ultimately, to the extent that companies raised cash during the time of near zero rates, you should have some resiliency there. I think the credit cycle happens in the private markets, in those middle markets where they couldn't quite raise the cash, because the corporate America is flush with cash right now. The refinancing there is not going to be the problem. And ultimately, the American consumer, looking at the unemployment data yesterday, the new claims data, we're at rock bottom. Yeah, there is not a problem in the labor market here. So, you have this weird push-pull where you're getting the bullwhip effect on inventories, and you've got labor working and spending.
Yeah. Alicia Levine, too short. Thank you so much for being with us. Alicia Levine of BNY Mellon Wealth Management. That is one of the most fascinating points, Tom, this idea of the private markets being where the big reset comes. And we heard from Harvard's endowment, and they actually said that they outperformed what they actually expect to have done in retrospect because they haven't yet seen the big markdowns in the private markets from some of their managers.
I like what we heard earlier this week where we go back to alpha, where individual security selection, bond and stock, really begins to matter. I can't emphasize enough the percentage of people out there that have never lived a Sharpe ratio, a legitimate risk-free rate into the risk-reward calculation.
Who've lived by indexes, who've lived by blanket buying.
They've lived by the great disinflation.
Right.
It's gone.
And so now what happens when you get a credit cycle in assets that you actually have to look at, right? I mean, that's what we were just hearing from Alicia. And I thought this story was interesting. Apollo and JP Morgan are working on building out secondary trading of private credit because they're anticipating the same kind of thing. And there's been some reporting on that because they expect that to be.
They're going to trade Bitcoin?
Well, I mean, I guess.
What I would say is in the 8 o'clock hour on a Friday, we have Alicia Levine over to Steve Major of HSBC, and that's what the show's all about.
Absolutely. Steve Major has been really out front, and he's going to have a pretty controversial call. I don't think he sees up and away for yields the same way that perhaps Larry Summers does.
No, it's going to be fascinating. Plus, he's got to talk about Aston Villa and Steve Gerrard out the door.
Well, I will let you spearhead that.
I'll have a monologue on that because where the hell is Pharaoh, right?
You're going to have a monologue on that coming up, hopefully without just too many monologues. Stephen Major, Global Head of Fixed Income Research at HSBC. This is Bloomberg.
Keeping you up to date with news from around the world with the first word, I'm Kriti Gupta. Biden administration officials are said to be discussing whether the U.S. should subject some of Elon Musk's ventures to national security reviews. Sources say that would include the Twitter deal and SpaceX's Starlink network. U.S. officials are uncomfortable with what they see as Musk's increasingly Russia-friendly stance and his plans to buy Twitter with foreign investors. Ukraine's foreign minister says he talked with Israel's prime minister about Kiev's request for defense systems to help combat Russian missiles and Iranian-made drones. Israel has offered to assist Ukraine with a missile warning system, but says it will not provide weapons. The U.S. has accused Tehran of sending trainers and technicians to Crimea to support Russian drone attacks. American Express has slumped after it set aside more for bad loans than analysts expected. It suggests rising interest rates could start hammering customers' abilities to pay their bills. Provisions for souring loans were $778 million in the quarter, worse than the $573 million analysts in a Bloomberg survey were expecting. The European Union has agreed to press ahead with a set of emergency actions to address the bloc's energy crisis. It comes after Germany yielded to pressure from other member states to pave the way for a temporary price cap on natural gas. The European Council's president says the move sends a clear signal to the market that the bloc is ready to act together. And Credit Suisse will aim to settle a tax fraud and money laundering case in France on Monday. The Swiss lender is reportedly in the final stretch of negotiations with prosecutors to reach an agreement that would include a fine but no admission of guilt. The size of the settlement is unknown, and the deal could still fall apart ahead of the court hearing. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Kriti Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
睇下投委會網頁先，點計劃去使錢，精明理財你須知，細心別隨便中招咪亂試，行住噏片極容易。若要基金股票揾錢，先了解下風險，做晒功課才入貨。若果數字通通計清楚，人生放鬆未過。
投委會同行10載，掌握理財更自在。
資訊由投委會提供。
I think that as we move forward, we're going to find that this is going to be an even tougher environment than people think. And I've been advocating something I've been advocating for a long time. This might be the return, to use the Wall Street term, alpha. This might be the return of stock pickers and bond pickers
Being tough. That was Jim Bianco, president of Bianco Research. Tough today in the FX market. Bonds on the move, currencies on the move, and it is a strong dollar. It is weaker bonds across the world. Yields up. Tom, things it feels like are starting to break around the edges.
Right.
With right now the Japanese yen at 151.8.
We're going to dive into this with Steve Major in the next half hour, but to take 30 seconds and steal it from Ed Ludlow on Twitter right now, we are at a moment here. I can't say enough, folks, looking at the Bloomberg terminal, the critical breakage points here on the Bloomberg Dollar Index, which shows, I'm going to talk pro talk here because it's that important. Short-term convexity on Bloomberg Dollar Index taken log. I see the yen breaking out with new velocity towards a 152, and sterling, with all the politics going on, Lisa, is absolutely textbook short cable, textbook chart short cable right now.
But how much is this really being driven by the dollar story and the yield story? And I say this because, yes, the UK has been a train wreck in terms of the political turmoil. However, we're not necessarily seeing this just only isolated to Great Britain. It's also the yen. It's also the euro. It is absolutely global. And I got to stagger back to one statistic here before we get to Twitter. 1.81% on the U.S. 10-year real yield. That is moving. That is almost to the phrase leaping logarithmically up, and from a 161 to a 180, maybe that's the one statistic that helps. We're talking about how quickly yields are moving on the flip side of the dollar and the real yields. The nominal yields,
10 basis points,
4.33% for the 10-year Treasury yield. At what point do we end up with something that really is a game changer in terms of longer-term expectations?
Keep you abreast of this, and of course, looking into foreign exchange is the deepest part of the market. The deepest part of Elon Musk's market is, well, maybe it's not going to work. A number of items out this morning saying he may have another cash call to finally get this transaction done. Edward Ludlow joins us right now, expert on all this. I think there's 4 Musk stories this morning. Which one matters for his ability to get this transaction?
Yeah, the Bloomberg report that DC's antagonized by him.
This is about Biden, national security.
Yeah, so Bloomberg
Council,
reported that according to sources, his recent behavior and commentary around the war in Ukraine, about his brief threat to remove the Starlink connectivity services that he was providing to help the efforts in Ukraine, and also just simply the deal to buy Twitter. Our sources tell us that across a range of government agencies, they're thinking we might take a look at this. Now, by the way, public service announcement, the White House has this morning said that it's not aware of any review of Elon Musk's security clearance or any security review of his businesses. But clearly they're thinking about it. This isn't the first time it's happened. 2019, he goes on the Rogan podcast, smokes marijuana. He also leads the biggest private space company.
Come on. You're not going to equate marijuana with a guy who builds technology which helps Ukraine in battle.
I'm not. All I'm saying is that this discussion around Elon Musk's behavior and his security clearances. Remember, SpaceX provides services not just to NASA, but to the military and the Pentagon. But also, he's a big contractor, right? And they simply said this is not behavior forthcoming or fitting for somebody who has this level of security clearance. The bigger issue around the deal is this. Ironically, we'd reported things going pretty well. Bankers on both sides working. The bank's getting ready for the debt call to come in, right? And then this comes out and it throws the deal into doubt, and you see that reflected in the market.
This is a distraction, let's be honest, because Twitter has been an ongoing distraction, a story unto itself of the Elon Musk kind of hubbub, but it masks the real story even at Twitter, which is that they were planning cuts at the company even before he got involved, that this was a company that was really struggling. And you're seeing that not just with Twitter, but the social media facing tech companies more broadly, as we saw from Snap. I mean, how much have we seen the reset already take its course versus have more to go?
Go back to what Jim Bianco just said on this program. The shock is greater than we expected. Actually, we thought the softness in the advertising market was done with. After the war in Ukraine and in Europe in particular, we had the commentary from Alphabet, parent of Google. We had the commentary from Snap actually already. But the wording in their earnings statement was so specific. A pullback in spending by advertisers. They're decreasing budgets, and all of these names are fighting for a small pool. Why is it important? It's actually a pretty good lens into the macro picture. Advertisers pull back their spending because consumers aren't spending. Why? They're hurt by inflation.
People are probably not interested as much in tech right now because they're looking at markets and they see, hold on a second, and they see yields moving dramatically. But this is part and parcel of potentially a similar story. The free money is over and tech is going to be reeling, and that is what we're seeing right now play out.
My eyes didn't light up just because I'm interested in tech and I'm trying to justify my existence. But, you know, I take Citi, for example. They have this call where they're overweight global tech. Why? Look at the specific names, the one with the strong balance sheets, with the entrenched market positions. When you're trying to work out what to do in an earnings season and where earnings on an EPS basis will hold up better than other corners of the market, there is a thinking that actually, yeah, of course Apple's going to fare better here. They're more nimble, they've got the cash to flex, they're smart about how they handle the economy globally. So there is some optimism out there around global tech being a better play, almost like a defensive stock.
Yeah.
Do you buy that theory? I don't know. But there is some corner of the market that believes that.
We'll perhaps find out. Ed Ludlow, thank you so much. Of Bloomberg, we'll find out perhaps on Thursday with the earnings. Right now, stocks and bonds very much on the move, yields higher, and the dollar really preeminent, Tom, around the globe.
Well, when Bruce Galbraith tweets in and says, Tom, give me a DXY quote. I don't have my Bloomberg with me. Bruce, good morning to you. DXY 113.86 out to 114. 115 is an unimaginable print. And I'm going to go right back to the IMF meeting where on camera and off camera, it was the same thing. They're watching swap lines, which is the borrowing of overnight money, think Friday, between major countries, including Switzerland. It's confusing, it's advanced, and critically, the nations that do not have available the ability to go out and borrow gajillions of dollars overnight, that don't have swap lines. And I'm going to say that these are the shadows cast right now by the rumors, the speculation, Lisa, about the unknown of swap line discussions of the IMF and all the major central banks.
Are you suggesting that there's some sort of backroom negotiation that has to be going on?
No, I'm not saying back room. I'm saying I'm looking at the Bloomberg screen on a Friday, and it's giving me all sorts of information that there's something going on out there. I don't know what it is.
I think that there is something going on. There's yields higher, and there's the dollar markedly stronger, and even more so as the moment goes on. And I do have to keep coming back to the yen. We had expected intervention. It has not come yet, at least to the satisfaction of markets, with a pervasive weakening in the currency as they stick by their yield curve.
Their goal is control there, and the way you get control is Saturday, Sunday into their morning. Stay with Asia and Bloomberg Radio and TV here on Sunday.
And Stephen Major, he's coming up. Cannot wait for that discussion.
瓦解同繁榮喺動盪世界嘅夾縫中，魔女睇到啲乜嘢呢？
この馬鹿げた状況、とっとと終わらせないとね。
陪休尼塔3。
This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Television and Bloomberg Radio. Tom Keene and Lisa Abramowitz. John Farrow is not really running for Prime Minister. He is off. We are seeing markets on the move. Stocks lower at session lows, down 0.7% on the S&P, down 0.8% now on the S&P. Euro at 97.14, weaker versus the dollar. Yields really are, to me, the driving force. Yes, it is a dollar story, but it is also very much a yield story with 10-year yields at 4.32%. Real yields crossing that 1.8% level. Tom, to me, this is a market that is facing some sort of reckoning. Have people gotten over their skis with how high yields can go?
What surveillance is about is you get lucky. And we got lucky yesterday with terrific work, particularly with David Merritt, who led all of our Brexit coverage ages ago. And Lisa, I thought it was just great yesterday to have everybody, Micklethwaite and the rest of them, weigh in on the absolute chaos there. You think we got lucky this morning?
Without a doubt, with bond vigilantes in the front seat, huh?
Dragging himself back from Hong Kong, Stephen Major joins us now with HSBC, Global Head of Fixed Income Research, and we're thrilled he could join Bloomberg in our New York studios. Forget about all the market talk here. What is the experience of living in Hong Kong under quarantine?
It's getting easier, much easier, and I can't wait to go back because we're free now. There is no quarantine. So I've done my time now.
You think they can salvage their relationship? I don't want to get you in trouble with HSB management, but you are optimistic they can salvage their relationship with Western banks to stay a financial capital?
Yeah, I think all the moves are in place, and November is a big month. Many people are going there, so yes. Yeah.
We are thrilled you joined us for this entire half hour. You are known as someone that has said price up and yield will stay down. We've seen a major adjustment here. What is the new major look on how yield finally crawls lower and price higher? When do we get there? How do we get there?
Don't you have a show called Real Yield?
We do.
Is that one of John's ones?
Yeah, I'm moonlighting this afternoon.
You're doing it. Well, at least it's relevant now because you actually do have a real yield.
No, it's relevant because Lisa's doing it and John's not doing it.
Actually,
continue.
Yeah, let's have fun at John's expense.
24/7. Continue, Mr. Major.
But if you can get real yield anywhere near 2%, that covers real GDP. So if you're building a portfolio from scratch, and you know this is without being encumbered by all of the carnage in markets the last few months. If you're building from scratch, 2% real yield covers GDP in the longer run. So we don't know where inflation is. It seems to be a good place to start building a portfolio with a real yield close to 2.
So let's just put this into something that's very clear. Do you see 10-year yields at 4.3% in the U.S. as a screaming buy, load up, because we are not going to see yields like this again?
Yeah, well, fortunately, I work with some professionals who contain my enthusiasm. So I would have been buying every week, right? So that's why I'm not a trader. But the point is the valuations today show a very strong recency bias. I mean, I can honestly believe that yields will keep going up in the near term, but you could also build a plausible scenario that there's a hard landing and that yields should be less than 2%. You could build that scenario. The question is, what weighting do you put on it, right? So at the moment, we're pricing a very high probability of the Fed going to 5 and staying there forever, which just doesn't seem plausible.
Well, a lot of people, and this is something that I was really excited that you were coming on to push against. What I'm hearing increasingly is that there is a stickier, more pervasive inflation over the long term, and that the Fed funds rate is not going to go below 2% anytime in the next decade, simply because of the deglobalization or the localized globalization, some of the population trends and some of these other macro factors.
Yeah, I don't think the longer term picture has changed, Lisa. Demographics, debt, wealth inequality, the explanations for low R-star have not reversed. I think you can give me some arguments that maybe underwrite or underpin the R-star, but not reverse it. I don't think you can reverse the pre-pandemic trend.
Just to quickly follow up to this, then do you think we're going to see 0% rates in the next 2 years?
观众朋友午安，欢迎收看10月22号新闻大白话，我是今天的节目主持人李作恒，也欢迎您一起加入我们来看时事。我们就先来介绍这一节要参与我们讨论的来宾，国民党文传会副主委郑世维水哥，
大家好；
前立委郑宝清，
大家好；
台北市议员洪汉廷，
主持人好，大家好。
好在昨天呢，这个已经是抽完号字了，那么当
But sometime next year, the market would not be wrong to be pricing in an easing cycle.
I got a zillion angles here. If you're on radio, Stephen Major with us with HSBC for this entire half hour. And the one angle I want to talk about is you mentioned the breakage that could be there, and what we're observing right now in the markets, DXY getting up near a 114 is without question the focus at the IMF was on swap lines.
Yeah.
Is it enough of a power in the foreign exchange market to see dollars strong, where there's a swap line demand or a desire for swap lines, even if I can't get them? And is that enough to make Jerome Powell blink?
There are a number of economies in Asia where there's been a tightness in the funding markets recently. And looking ahead to year-end kind of pressures, we had a fire drill with the UK, which showed what lessons did we get from the UK? Fast moves are dangerous. It isn't just the level; it's the speed, right? So I wouldn't be surprised if the Fed was watching that very closely. Was there a point a week or so ago when people were worried? You see, at the moment, what happened in the UK wasn't enough to distract the Fed from its hawkishness, but who's to know if something spills into a market somewhere? And in fact, it'd be wrong of me to speculate, but there are so many pools of leverage in the global economy, so many areas that need to refinance. And when the dollar is moving like this and the rates are so high, the spreads are so wide, there's going to be some pain. So I don't want to come on here and speculate as to where it is, but you're right. The swap lines are being looked at because there's tension.
Do we have good data now? John Byrne Murdoch, first thing I tweeted out today over at the FT with a fabulous essay on the opacity of Chinese economic data. Do you feel sitting at your desk in Hong Kong that you have good Pacific Rim data, that you have good global data, or are the tensions germane as you see in the swap line data?
I think we're always struggling to catch up, Tom, and we're all experts about LDI now in the UK, but we weren't before. Like we can all quote numbers and talk about what happened. But
Can I do a shout out to Jordan Rochester? Nomura just killed it. I found a Nomura paper from 4 or 5 years ago on LDI that absolutely nailed what was going on.
So we're all experts in LDI, and we're also all experts in British politics. I'm wondering, as you talk about the speed, and this is something people have been talking about, what happens to 10-year Treasury yields if Japan abandons, perhaps, its peg, or has some sort of failed intervention, as we see almost 152, 151.9 right now on the dollar versus the yen?
We're trying to game this one out. With US yields here, if the YCC was changed, if there was an iterative shift, it would have much less impact than where yields were 1 year ago. So if Japan had changed its policy, global fixed income could have been de-anchored a year ago. If they were to do it today, it kind of doesn't matter so much because they're going to be adjusting into a bigger spread because US yields are so high compared to Japan. So the Bank of Japan estimates that the 10-year JGB would be around 80 basis points if there was no YCC. But this isn't black and white. It's not going to be no YCC. It's going to be an iterative shift. Yeah.
What you're saying, though, is important, which is we've already done a lot of the work to reduce the shock value of how quickly the moves can be. Does this mean, perversely, that you end up with yields higher for longer because there isn't some sort of trigger that causes some sort of monetary policy to step in?
Higher for longer? Well, that's a good one. So is that the opposite of lower for longer?
Yeah, exactly. Well, we saw that for a long time.
I think that when you've had a once-in-a-century pandemic and all the other supply-side shocks that we've had, we shouldn't expect a return in the space of a year to what we had before. It's a multi-year process. I think that 3 to 5 years out, we'll be back where we were in 2019.
You're going to be with us for the whole half hour, which is really, really great. We're thrilled by that. John from Glasgow emails in and says, soccer talk time with Steve Major. Noel Quinn comes in today. Noel, thank you for watching HSBC. He says he's paid for you to see 4 Premier League games in the last 10 days or something. What'd you observe here? And give us an update on West Ham and the rest of English football.
I was very lucky when I was back in the UK. I saw 5 games in 8 days. At West Ham, which is my club, and I also went to Arsenal. And it's just fantastic. The quality of football is just getting better and better every year. It is amazing. It's just such a privilege now to go to games.
That's what John Farrow says exactly. Can star players be good, what we would call coaches or managers? Gerrard out at Aston Villa.
Yeah.
Is it just too hard for a player to do that?
Well, as we know, Steven Gerrard was a superb player, but I think the step into management is difficult because how do you motivate and manage these multi-millionaire players just because you happen to be a player yourself? I mean, management, as we know, is a particular skill. The guy that runs Ford doesn't have to be an engineer. For example, right? And so you see someone like Mourinho. He wasn't really a player, but he's one of the best managers of all time. So, I think Steven Gerrard's an interesting case study.
Was that enough soccer talk there, Lisa?
Sorry, I'm
looking at
yields. No, I'm looking at yields, which have been really on the move.
We did that for John. We missed John.
It's so obvious that Lisa's not interested.
You have no idea. You have no idea. With that, we're going to save the half hour and come back here with Steve Major. Lisa, take us out, but I'm sorry. I've got velocity on dollar strength here that's extraordinary.
113, almost to 114, really. And I will just say, I think it's awesome. It's just a foreign language to me. You have to be following it, and then, if you're not, then it's hard to know. But I am following the bond market. Yes.
It's a foreign language to me. I just fake it.
Do you want me to try to fake it? I think people would cry. I think that they'd put a cat up at this seat instead of me in front of 10 Downing Street. Right now, we are watching the S&P lower by 0.8%. And you can see that yen really close to 152, 151.93. This is Bloomberg.
Keeping you up to date with news from around the world with the first word, I'm Kriti Gupta. The White House says they are unaware of any national security review for some of Elon Musk's ventures. It's been reported that U.S. government and intelligence officials were weighing in on the possibility of using tools to review Musk's multiple ventures. Those ventures were said to include the Twitter deal and SpaceX's Starlink network. President Biden has started aggressively promoting his student debt relief plan. The government has been working out kinks in the program. A White House event Monday is set to officially launch an application website. Meanwhile, multiple legal challenges, including a lawsuit from Republican-led states, are moving through courts threatening to halt the effort. China has locked down parts of a central city, confining some of its 13 million people to their homes for at least a week. Other major hubs are rolling out virus restrictions as well, reflecting the country's commitment to its COVID-0 policy. Residents in high-risk areas are required to stay at home until no new infections are reported for 7 days, and they get moved to medium risk. Italy's Giorgia Meloni has clinched a mandate from her coalition on the path to becoming Italy's first female premier. The coalition, which includes her Brothers of Italy party, former Premier Silvio Berlusconi's party, and Matteo Salvini's League, told President Sergio Mattarella that she is their candidate. Mattarella is expected to formally ask her as early as Friday to try to form a government. Kering posted slower sales growth than luxury rivals LVMH and Hermes during the third quarter. The company's Gucci brand was said to be held back by China's continuing COVID-19 restrictions. Kering CFO told analysts the Italian brand's revenue from the mainland declined during the quarter, and the situation there is still not back to normal. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Kriti Gupta. This is Bloomberg.
I would not be surprised how fragile financial markets are, that the Fed has to pause to get them back under control. The U.S. financial markets are in a good place right now, but if nothing else, the UK has shown us how fragile to an event, to a bad policy decision. So I don't feel confident about what they're going to do in December, let alone where we're going to be by June of next year.
She is a former Fed economist that barely describes the academic contributions of Claudia Sahm. She's controversial. With us today on the Fed, and she, not only that, she has her own ratio, if you will, the Sahm measurement of recession, which you can see throughout all the Fed system. She's had really quite a splash academically, and then linking it over to all the punditry that we see each and every day. We welcome you to Bloomberg Surveillance on radio and television. And what a joy, some quiet moments here with Stephen Major of HSBC in a very unquiet time. My study, and this goes back to Martin Feldstein of Harvard, is that these things end stochastically. Things move and they don't level, they don't plateau, they get pointy, they turn around in reverse. What is the stochastic event that will allow some of the carnage I see on my screen to reverse?
That's right, Tom. I think that it might even be a bimodal market. So you've got one mode that's got this strong recency bias, and then there's the other one that prices in an event. I mean, the facts are that the median number of months between the last hike and the first cut, based on the last 70 years of data, guess what? 4 months. Mm-hmm. The mean is 8, so it's skewed because of the 2006-2008 period. But my point is, you just look at the numbers. Once they've hit the peak, the market is not wrong to be looking over the other side. And what's the event? Well, the UK could have been. If the UK event of fast-moving yields and disruption somehow affected the US financial markets. I'm talking here about money markets or mortgage markets, or you said swap lines, all this stuff. Who knows? That makes the Fed think twice about going all the way to 5 or above.
You're living in Hong Kong, you're living the anti-science of China. Fine. The anti-science of monetary policy is Japan. Everyone knows this. What are the ramifications to the Steve Major world when they capitulate on YCC in some face-saving form and you get yen 152 to 129 over literally a cup of coffee?
Yeah.
What happens to the system?
I don't think you get the shock that you could have had if they'd changed YCC a year ago. Because of where US yields sit today, they're so far above. So they can soak up easily a Japanese move. I imagine the Japanese curve would flatten, so it would be a bear flattening, because the curve is so steep between 10 and 30 years. Now, in global fixed income, that's not gone unnoticed. If you're sitting in Germany, you can switch from your local market into JGBs and pick up yield because of the curve steepness and the hedging. Because Japanese rates are below zero at the front end, whereas ECB and Fed are hiking. So there are opportunities here in global fixed income from the divergences.
To go to your arch thesis, is they manufacture what I'm going to editorialize here and say a pseudo-inflation. Are we essentially going to have a stochastic move back to disinflationary trends in the arch major theory, which is some forms of deflation?
I think so. And from a Japanese perspective, if you've waited 30 years to come out of deflation, a couple of months of +2, +3 doesn't do it. And that's the Kuroda approach. We don't know who Kuroda's replacement is going to be. He or she won't be in place until next year. So it's just speculation on our part, and I feel very much that's all we're doing. Right? We're trying to game it out anyway.
And now, folks, we dive into our World Cup coverage. We do this without John Farrow, which is unfortunate. You, of course, have a global mandate. You're going to be in the Middle East. I guess you're going to attend the World Cup. Can you explain to mere mortals like me how we see a good product with 86 degrees on the field?
It might be a slow game. It could be completely different. I mean, I'm going to go and see some England games. I'm lucky enough to get tickets, but I think it's going to be a strange World Cup. It's going to be surreal, because in that kind of heat, it'll be a lot cooler than it is in the summer, obviously, but the game's going to be slower and I guess more measured. It's not going to be as crazy as the Premiership, because you've seen how fast they play in the Premiership. You've seen it yourself.
On sterling and gilts, let's finish there. I've got a 110.84. We've moved a full stick here on sterling this morning, 112 down to 110.87. It's inappropriate for you to comment on the politics, but please, on the pressures that Governor Bailey faces.
Well, he's reiterated the independence, and I think he's been pushed into a bit of a corner. I mean, it didn't help that the Bank of England was hiking at a pace less than the Fed before the events in Downing Street. But the Bank of England's role is quite interesting here, because they are buyer of last resort, and they've shown their ability to do that. And I think the gilt market has actually calmed down quite a lot. And one of the big differences between the UK and US is that things can happen very, very quickly in the UK. All of those fiscal proposals have basically been abandoned.
Could you be long 10, 30-year gilt this morning? Price up, yield down?
I think you can start to look at it, and I'm interested in how gilts look compared to equities, for example. And there will be a lot of fund managers looking at those relationships, bonds versus equities. It's the same in the US. There's a point when you have to start favouring bonds over the risky assets, and I think that's. Ultimately, for the Bank of England, it's they've got the QT, they've got the QE, they've got the policy rates, they've got to work with the DMO on patterns of issuance, which could be modified. I think that the worst is past us now, and I think we'll probably see a period of calm after the shock.
The period of calm will come after your view forward for 2023. A theme for 2023 that we may see written by HSBC.
Yeah, I'm not going to front run the research because we haven't published it.
It wasn't, did you hear that, folks? I didn't hear that.
We haven't even